Al Jazeera has taken the killing of its correspondent, Shireen Abu Akleh, to the International Criminal Court. The team was accompanied by family members of the Palestinian-American journalist at The Hague. The lawsuit comes with a 6-month investigation by the television network's legal team. Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed by Israeli forces in May while reporting from the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. The press conference at The Hague is just gotten underway. We're going to cross there live now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming this morning. My name's Cameron Doley. I'm Al Jazeera's external counsel, and I'm chairing this, but the more important voices are flanked on either side of me. Just to confirm that we have just come from the International Criminal Court, where the network has submitted Shireen's case to the prosecute, the Office of the Prosecutor there. That submission comes 6 months after her killing on the 11th of May of this year. And during that time, Al Jazeera's legal team has conducted a full and detailed investigation into the case. And we have unearthed new evidence based upon several eyewitness accounts, the examination of multiple items of video footage and forensic evidence pertaining to the case. The submission to the ICC prosecutor has highlighted the new witness evidence and video footage, which clearly shows that Shireen and her colleagues were directly fired at by Israeli Defense Forces. The claim by the Israeli authorities that Shireen was killed by mistake in an exchange of fire is clearly unfounded. The evidence presented to the Office of the Prosecutor confirms without any doubt that there was no firing in the area where Shireen was, other than the IDF shooting directly at her. The journalists were in full view of the IDF as they walked as a group slowly down the road, wearing distinctive media vests, and there were no other persons in the road. The IDF inquiry that found there was no suspicion of any crime being committed is entirely undermined by the available evidence, which has now been provided to the Office of the Prosecutor. The evidence shows that this deliberate killing was part of a wider IDF campaign to target and silence Al Jazeera. The network welcomes and acknowledges the continuous efforts and support of the international community and human rights organisations in calling for the perpetrators of this crime to be held accountable. I'm now going to pass to various of my colleagues here, distinguished colleagues, but also people intimately involved with Shireen and with her case. I'm going to start with my professional colleague, Rodney Dixon, KC.
Good morning. Thank you very much for attending today. It is a very significant day because we have, as Cameron explained, just submitted on behalf of Al Jazeera the full file of evidence that has been gathered to the ICC prosecutor. And what we're urging is that, given that in the Palestine situation there is already an investigation open, that this case should be one of those prioritized to be taken up as soon as possible. Already 6 months has passed without the Office of the Prosecutor giving any indication about what is happening with this case. Many have called for an investigation. Shireen's family who are here today have made their own request. The Palestinian Authority has provided a comprehensive body of evidence, and yet there's been complete silence from the Office of the Prosecutor on this case, on cases across the board, in fact, in the Palestine situation. But we're here today to focus on Shireen's brutal killing. So we are urging in our submission that the prosecutor now has a comprehensive body of evidence. We have, over the last 6 months, interviewed eyewitnesses who were there, who recorded it. We've also unearthed a whole lot of new footage that has come out from different angles, different places, showing what happened. There's been a comprehensive inquiry done by Hague, which also looked at a crime scene analysis, which put together with the evidence that we are providing and all the evidence that there makes a overwhelming case for the prosecutor to investigate. There can be no reason now, we say, not to take the next step, which is to investigate, find the persons responsible and charge them. There's no obstacle. Of course, the prosecutor would have to go to the judges to request those arrest warrants, but that's what needs to take place now. The prosecutor's office has had this evidence already for some time. They certainly have all of the available material now. And we are thus most hopeful that in the coming months, we can finally see progress in this case. We are in particular highlighting that not only should the prosecutor be looking at those people who were directly involved in the shooting, but those who were in command. The prosecution has clear responsibility to look at those who bear the greatest responsibility for the commission of these crimes. And that means going up the chain of command. The ICC undoubtedly has jurisdiction over the doctrine of command responsibility. And that means not only looking at those people who directly oversaw the operation, but also those who have failed to prevent it and take any action after the fact. At the very least, those in command should be held responsible because they've said there's no suspicion here of any crime. So there's been a complete cover-up. The ICC statute, the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols require that those in command must at the very least investigate and punish those responsible. Otherwise, they are as liable as those persons who pulled the trigger. They can be held responsible for the murder as though they were there if they do nothing afterwards. That's the state of international humanitarian law. That is what applies here, and that's what we're asking the prosecutor to turn his attention to. We are aware, and we've mentioned this in our submissions, of the fact that the FBI has indicated that they are going to conduct an investigation. That is to be welcomed, but to make it very clear, that's not a reason for the prosecutor to step back and say, I'm now not going to take any action. Under the complementarity regime, the ICC should be investigating alongside national states. Clearly, the Israeli authorities are not doing anything. They're not playing their part. But if other states are, that is to be encouraged. The prosecutor can work with them. They can share evidence, particularly if they have evidence of those who are responsible, those in command. That can be done on a cooperative basis. And the prosecution here in The Hague can intervene if the national jurisdiction is not covering it sufficiently, or if they're only looking at certain perpetrators. This has happened before. Those can be looked at by the national jurisdiction, and others, particularly those at a higher level, by the ICC prosecutor. So there's no reason not to take this forward or to freeze things because of the FBI investigation. Lastly, we also want to emphasize that the case that we've presented is one which shows a wider attack on Al Jazeera over a prolonged period of time, which has now escalated to the direct taking of life. But prior to that, there had been the bombing of Al Jazeera's bureau in Gaza. That is included in our submission and evidence of that and those who were there at the time, together with a number of other attacks and assaults and torture of Al Jazeera journalists. And of course, we add to that journalists under attack in Palestine generally. So there's a wider pattern and policy here in relation to Al Jazeera, a clear attempt to shut it down and silence it in Palestine, to prevent the truth and the information that the public wants coming out. So there's also no reason to say this is only an isolated incident and not one for the ICC. No, it is an extremely serious incident that falls within the context of a widespread and systematic campaign. And that's why we're asking the prosecutor to look both at crimes against humanity and war crimes. To conclude, we are hopeful that there will now be justice for Shireen. We are urging on behalf of Al Jazeera, on behalf of Shireen and her family, that the prosecutor do the right thing now with all the available evidence and look to identify those responsible and charge them so they can be put on trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. Rod mentioned Shireen's family, and we have with us Lina, who is Lina Abu Akleh, who is Shireen's niece.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I'm Lina Abu Akleh, Shireen Abu Akleh's niece, who, as you know, and as we mentioned, shot and killed by an Israeli soldier over 6 months ago. I'm here today on behalf of my family because months after multiple requests have been submitted to the ICC, the court has still not taken meaningful action towards accountability. When individual states are unwilling or incapable of investigating their own atrocities, as in the case with Israel, it is the responsibility of the international community to intervene to ensure war crimes don't go unpunished. While there is overwhelming evidence from multiple eyewitnesses, over a dozen of investigations by reputable news outlets and human rights organizations, and the United Nations, that Shireen was targeted and killed by an Israeli soldier, my family still doesn't know who the person is that shot that deadly bullet and who was involved in the chain of command that allowed them to kill my aunt. These answers are critical in pursuing accountability and justice for Shireen. It is clear that Israel has a history and a de facto state policy of targeting Palestinian journalists like my aunt in order to silence their reporting on Israel's human rights violations against Palestinians. Israeli soldiers are almost never held accountable for their war crimes, which creates a culture of impunity that allows for these atrocities to continue. But we must end impunity for Israeli war crimes. It's past time for justice for Shireen and for every Palestinian that has been killed by the Israeli army. My family is here in full support of Al Jazeera's submission regarding an investigation into my aunt's killing, just as we stood in support of last month's submission to the ICC. Shireen worked at Al Jazeera for 25 years. They were like her second family. We expect the prosecutor to work quickly to pursue the truth and justice, and we expect the court to deliver with accountability for the individuals and institutions responsible for this crime. And we also request a meeting with the prosecutor himself. The evidence is overwhelmingly clear. It's time for the ICC to take action, and we would expect anyone to do the same if it was your sister, your aunt, or best friend that was killed. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. I'd now invite Walid Amari, who is Al Jazeera's man on the ground, as it were, and was a close working colleague of Shireen to address you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for everybody here. We came here to ask the General Prosecutor to take action in the case of Shireen. Now, more than 6 months have passed since the murder of our dear colleague, friend, and sister, Shireen Abu Akleh, and all the eyewitnesses, the videos, the evidences, and the investigations were conducted by international institutions and locals, and the international media. They confirmed the facts that the shooting was from where the Israeli troops stationed in Jenin, and they targeted Shireen and the other colleagues who was in combining with her in the place. And they also confirmed that all the shooting was to Shireen and others, and the traces of the bullets in the carob trees where Shireen fell is ranged between 127 centimeters and 178 centimeters, which confirmed that they targeted to kill. And the second thing, that all the journalists, including the late Shireen, they wearing in the same time, they're wearing the vests and the helmets labeled press, which means that it was very easy for the Israeli soldiers to identify and to recognize them as journalists in the area. And also, all this investigation were conducted, they confirmed that wasn't there any armed Palestinian people, wasn't there any exchange of fire in the area. And when the group of the journalists, including Shireen, they arrived, it was calm, it was quiet, wasn't there any dangers for anybody, and they start walking just to do their job. And they were far from the Israeli troops, more than 180 meters. We came here to ask the general prosecutor, as I said, to take action in this case. We will follow all the steps, and we will continue to support the family and to support our colleagues. When we asking or we demanding justice for Shireen, this means that we need protection. We need to protect ourselves, because they will continue. Our issue here, our case is not against the soldier who pressed the trigger. It's a systematic policy in, that they continue shooting and attacking journalists. And since the Israeli occupation started in June '67, until now, more than 104 Palestinian journalists were killed. For us, they killed Shireen twice. They killed Shireen when they shot her in Jenin, and they killed her when they attacked the casket, the coffin, inside the French hospital in East Jerusalem, while people preparing themselves for the funeral. And we didn't have any kind of interpretation for this action that the Israeli occupation police, when they attacked and they invaded to inside the hospital. Because that, I said, for us, they killed Shireen twice. As I said before, and as my colleagues here informed, we came to ask the general prosecutor to take action in this case, action which means to open investigation and to follow who is responsible for this policy and the killing of our dearest Shireen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walid. Next, Fran Marioevich, the Executive Director of the International Press Institute, please.
Hello, good morning, and thank you. The International Press Institute is a global network of editors, journalists dedicated to quality and independent journalism. And in this context, Shireen's killing in May sent shockwaves through our media community and press freedom organizations. As was said already, Shireen and her colleagues were wearing blue vests emblazoned with press, clearly marked, and therefore were clearly targeted as journalists. Several journalist organizations, including Bellingcat, including the Forensic Architecture team, helped to counter initial efforts by the Israeli authorities to sow doubt over who killed Shireen. And this is another example where the media are doing key investigations and reporting on the facts. And after initially denying responsibility, in September, Israeli authorities admitted that there was a high possibility that Shireen was accidentally hit by its forces, but they refused to pursue a further investigation or bring any charges against the soldiers involved. And this is, in this context, we welcome the submission to the International Criminal Court by the family, by Al Jazeera, and the announcement recently by the US that there will be an FBI investigation into Shireen's killing. But this has to be, as was said already, complementary to the investigation by the ICC, because states have a responsibility to investigate attacks on journalists promptly, thoroughly, and independently, and to prosecute those who are responsible. This is one of states' fundamental responsibilities. It's the fundamental right of the right to life. And this responsibility does not disappear in a conflict or in a conflict zone. On the contrary, the authorities are legally bound under international law and human rights law to ensure the safety of journalists, even in situations of conflict. And a deliberate attack on a journalist can constitute even a war crime. And as we heard, Shireen was the latest in a long list of journalists killed by the Israeli military. I saw the figures by UNESCO that at least 18 journalists in Palestine have been killed by the Israeli forces in the last 20 years. That's almost one every year. In addition, many have been attacked, threatened, had their equipment destroyed. And this killing of Shireen represents a particularly egregious attack on press freedom, not only because of the credible reports that Shireen and other journalists were intentionally targeted as journalists, as I said, they were wearing clearly marked vests as press, but because of the impunity by the Israeli forces for crimes against journalists. And the government announcement that it will not investigate this killing further adds to these concerns. The International Press Institute, together with 34 human rights groups, demand an independent investigation into the killing of Shireen. In August this year, we, together with the international media support, honored Shireen Abu Akleh with the 2022 World Press Freedom Hero Award, noting that Shireen dedicated her career to reporting on a range of issues in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories, often risking her life to work on the front lines. She inspired millions across the Arab world with her professionalism and dedication to pursuing the truth. At our General Assembly, our members met in New York in September, and they unanimously adopted a resolution calling for full justice in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. So in the absence of an independent investigation, an impartial investigation by the government of Israel, we call on the ICC to conduct this investigation into the circumstances of Shireen's killing and whether this constitutes a war crime under the Rome statutes. This is about Shireen's right to life and every journalist's right to life. There must be accountability for this senseless and horrific killing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Antoine Bernard, Director of Advocacy at Reporters Without Borders.
Shireen's murder is the ultimate demonstration of a pattern, IDF targeting journalists. This is called a war crime. Shireen's murder is not the first case of journalists targeted by IDF. We fear it is not the last one, as long as justice is not served. Independent, impartial, effective justice. This is why Reporters Without Borders calls the ICC prosecutor to take action. His investigation on Palestine must proceed. It must get to conclusions. Shireen was murdered on 11 May 2022 in Jenin. 4 years before, May 2018, Gaza. Journalists covering the March of Return are repeatedly shot at by IDF snipers. 25 May 2018, RSF filed its first criminal complaint on Palestine with the ICC prosecutor after analyzing the case of 20 journalists, including 2 shot dead. They are Yasser Murtaja, 30, a photographer for the independent Ain Media Agency, and Ahmed Abu Hussein, 27, a reporter for Chab and Bisa News. Both were clearly identified as journalists, either by a vest or by a helmet bearing the word press. In all, at least 20 journalists have sustained gunshot injuries. 1 year before Shireen's murder, May 2021, in Gaza again, targeted Israeli forces attacks destroyed the bureaus of Associated Press and Al Jazeera and more than 20 media outlets. 25 May 2021, RSF filed its second criminal complaint with the ICC prosecutor, asking for the prosecutor to include Israeli airstrikes in the investigation into the situation in Palestine. Yes, Palestinian journalists have been targeted for doing their job as journalists. Very likely those crimes, including Shireen's, qualify as war crimes. At a minimum, there are reasonable grounds to believe so. Where is distinction? Where is precaution? Where is proportionality? Not only international humanitarian law imposes a negative obligation not to harm, it imposes a positive obligation to protect, especially journalists, for their social function is a cornerstone of democracy. In Palestine, the occupying power, Israel, is very far from it. Violating such negative and positive obligations have a name under criminal law: war crime. Independent investigation, prosecution, arrest warrants are long overdue for accountability to prevail at last. Israeli justice, mere camouflage, alibi, and eventually escape. The caricature of, quote, unwillingness, in the words of the Rome Statute. This is why Reporters Without Borders does support Shireen's family, Lina, triggering the ICC prosecutor. This is why Reporters Without Borders does support Al Jazeera's filing to the ICC investigation today. This is why Reporters Without Borders calls the ICC prosecutor to action. His investigation on the situation in Palestine, including the crimes against journalists, including Shireen's murder, must proceed.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, everybody. We've heard the legal perspective, the professional perspective, and the perspective of Shireen's family as well. If anybody has any questions for any members of the panel, please let them be known. Thank you. Please.
Not all-time professional. I hope you can hear me now, or do I have to push a button here? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I have a question. I don't know who can answer that, but how difficult would it be to also prosecute the important politicians or military commanders who are responsible? Because how can you perhaps they deliberately decided to kill Shireen, and how can you prove that? Because you cannot, of course, if Israel don't cooperate, you don't get all the evidence there. So how is it possible to get the real perpetrators?
Thank you. Perfectly understand. Rod, you touched upon this when you spoke briefly.
Yes, thank you. And this is a challenge in every case that the ICC has to take up, is how to link it to those higher up who are in command. We see in the Ukraine situation at the moment that the prosecutor is looking at the same complexities arising. But there are clearly ways through this, through the prosecutor focusing on getting the right evidence and to find the routes to achieve that is vital. Our concern at the moment is that no steps have even been taken to try and do that. I mean, that's what prosecutors have to do. They have to engage with the tough evidential issues and show a commitment to doing that, as we expect from all of our national police forces and prosecutors. When there's a murder, we don't just say, how are we going to do this? No, we expect the police to find a way of doing it, and they have to work around the clock, 24 hours, 360 days to make sure that they exhaust every single channel and find that evidence. So there are certainly ways of doing it, and the important thing now is to show the commitment to chasing it down. In Shireen's case, there is ample video footage of the vehicles that were involved. We have number plates identified. It will be possible to identify the units involved, those who are in command, and then extend it all the way up. Likewise, as I mentioned early on, the FBI are looking at this matter. There can be cooperation with national bodies who may well have evidence to show who was directly involved. Prosecutors can also draw inferences from all of the circumstances. In many cases that I've been involved in, you don't always have direct evidence, but you can look at all of the circumstances and show what is the only reasonable conclusion. And then lastly, at the very least, the doctrine of command responsibility is a safety net for all, where a military force like the IDF simply says there's no suspicion of any crime. That's a clear breach of the doctrine of command responsibility, because you have a duty to have an effective investigation, an investigation which would look at all of the angles, including interviewing the very witnesses who we've interviewed. There's no evidence that the IDF has made any effort. They certainly haven't interviewed the witnesses who we interviewed to find out what happened. You're also required under the doctrine to have contact with the family, with the employer, with Al Jazeera. There's been no contact, no effective investigation has taken place to get to the bottom of this. And that's a violation of international humanitarian law. And as I say, those in charge of that who refuse to do that can be prosecuted as though they were the murderers. It's a very particular doctrine that exists in international law that can be used here. It doesn't exist in all our national jurisdictions, hence a reason for complementarity, but it certainly does here. So at the very least, the doctrine of command responsibility can be deployed. And it's not only military commanders, it's actually called superior responsibility because it covers both military and political if they had effective control over the perpetrators in the situation. Yes, you have to show that they knew or should have known, but that is a different mental standard to directly intending it. And in this situation, with all of the information out there, and also the fact that people know now, they certainly know now, and they've brazenly said they're not going to do anything about it. So that's a basis alone to trigger the prosecution's actions, in addition to all of the direct forms of responsibility.
Thank you, Rod. Gentleman on the second row. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff Henmaker. I'm an associate professor at the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. I teach human rights and international law, and I'm very pleased about this press conference. I also want to extend my sympathy, my condolences, and my solidarity with the family of Ms. Abu Akleh. Thank you very much also for being here. I just want to say, ask for confirmation. Did you meet with the International Criminal Court? What was their response? And do you not get the sense that they realize how this is part of a continuing pattern of harassment, of persecution, not just of journalists, but also of human rights defenders, including representatives of many Palestinian human rights organizations here today? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have to pass that to Rod because he was the man who went into the ICC today to pass over the filing.
Yes, thanks. We didn't have a formal meeting with the OTP. We handed over the material. There's a lot of material on USB devices to the evidence unit so that they can process it and it'll now be reviewed. And as has been mentioned, we will be looking to follow that up with a formal meeting. But the first stage is to get it in and to get it all reviewed together with all the evidence that's there ready, and then look to take up the matter further with a formal meeting.
Sorry, when?
This morning at the ICC building.
Gentleman on the third row.
Everybody, my name is Helmut Hetzel. I'm foreign correspondent here in The Hague. I report for media in Germany, Switzerland, Austria.
If you are just joining us, you've been watching a media conference from a delegation from Al Jazeera, which has highlighted the steps the International Criminal Court should take to pursue justice for correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh. She was shot and killed by Israeli forces in Jenin in the occupied West Bank in May. Jonah Hull has also been at that press conference at The Hague and joins us now. Jonah, the delegation has outlined its evidence, handed it over to the ICC. Can you explain the process from here?
Well, described as a significant moment by Rodney Dixon, KC, the lawyer leading the investigation and leading Al Jazeera's submission to the International Criminal Court. Clearly, the participants in the room in that press conference you've been listening to will be hoping that this amounts to a significant step further down the road towards justice and accountability for the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh on May the 11th this year. Now, Rodney Dixon, KC, set out the basis upon which they are filing this formal request to the ICC to launch an investigation and to prosecute those responsible. He said that the case was submitted as part of the wider responsibility undertaken by the ICC in March 2021, recognising its own jurisdiction over events and claims arising in the occupied territories. He requested that this become part of that wider investigation and also noted that it is being presented in the context of a wider attack on Al Jazeera and journalists more generally in Palestine by the Israeli military in an attempt, he said, to silence the media. Now, the package, if you like, the dossier of evidence being presented here is the result of a 6-month-long investigation by Al Jazeera, Shireen's employer, of course, which he said shows via eyewitness reports, new video being analysed, forensics and crime scene analysis that Shireen and her media colleagues were fired at directly by the military, that the Israeli military's claim that she had been killed essentially by accident, by mistake, as part of gunfire being exchanged by Israeli and Palestinian gunmen was unfounded. There is evidence, he said, that puts in no doubt that there was no other firing taking place apart from that coming from the Israeli soldiers, and that the media group were in full view of them wearing very clearly marked media-style insignia. Therefore, the contention is that the claim of the Israeli military that no crime was committed is entirely unfounded and undermined. What happens now, to answer your question, sorry, after that lengthy explanation? Well, all of this evidence is handed over to the ICC, to the Office of the Prosecutor, Karim Khan, who will pore over it and essentially decide whether to launch an investigation. All of that said, though, it has been pointed out, and pointed out very strenuously by Shireen's niece, Lina Abu Akleh, that in the months since her death, nearly 7 months now, after repeated requests to the ICC to investigate, still no action has been taken. So the hope, as I said, that this is a step along the road, but no immediate word from the ICC and no immediate sign of whether indeed the prosecutor will take up the case.
OK, Jonah Hull, thank you so much for that. Jonah Hull from The Hague for us. Thank you.